There are more ways we can express our ideas and thoughts in words other than the conventional means, such as through noun phrases, adjective phrases, or adverb phrases. In this article, you will learn the meaning of infinitive phrase, its examples, how it is formed, its functions, as well as other cool subtopics. What is an infinitive phrase? An infinitive phrase is a phrase that is made up of the particle, to, a verb in its base form, that is, without inflection for tense, present/past, or number, singular/plural, and other words that can serve as object, complement, or qualifier elements in the phrase. To better understand the concept of infinitive phrase, it is important to understand what infinitives are. Infinitives are structures that are formed by a combination of the particle, to, and a verb in its base form. For instance, to learn. The example above is an infinitive because it contains the particle, to, and a verb in its base form. We call it a particle because it does not serve any purpose in isolation, until it is added to an independent element such as a base form verb, or even a noun phrase to form a prepositional phrase, as in, to the moon. The verb in an infinitive is said to be in base form because it is stripped of its inflectional properties, meaning that such verbs cannot account for such grammatical properties as tense, present or past tense, or number, singular or plural. This is because adding the particle, to a verb negates its inflectional properties, which results in the formation of infinitives. Now that you have a better understanding of infinitives, we can proceed. Bearing in mind what infinitives are, we can simply say that infinitive phrases are infinitives with more words or elements that perform a number of functions. This is because an infinitive has to be the head word of an infinitive phrase, since it is named after it, hence other words that follow it will perform the function of providing additional information about the infinitive. A head word is the most important element of a phrase, which is why they are named after it, and we can have a phrase containing only a head word without a modifier, coming before the head word, or a qualifier, appearing after the head word. You will find out what this means as you progress in reading this article. Examples of infinitive phrase. To learn on the job is an efficient growth process. She was told to carry the whole team along. The best way to get what you want is by focusing on what you need. We need assistance to build a suitable mansion. All the sentences in the examples above each contain an infinitive phrase at different positions in them. This shows that they can perform a number of positions depending on their positions in sentences, as you will find out in the latter sections of this article. Let us briefly analyze the infinitive phrase in the first example. For instance, to learn on the job. It is an infinitive phrase because it is headed by the particle, to, and a verb in its base form, learn, which both act as the head words of the phrase accompanied by the qualifier, on the job. The qualifier serves the purpose of giving us additional information about the head words, to learn. It helps us in determining the context of their use. How to form infinitive phrases. When it comes to forming infinitive phrases, a particular pattern is used in almost every instance. They even have a formula for their formation: infinitive plus object, complement, plus qualifier. You may be wondering why the object, complement, and qualifier were placed in brackets. The reason is because they are optional elements in an infinitive phrase. Take for instance, to make dessert for a party. In the infinitive phrase above, we have the head word, to make, the object, dessert, and the qualifier, for a party. But what happens when we take away the object and qualifier elements of the phrase? We will be left with, to make. What we are left with is the head word of the phrase, and it still stands as an infinitive phrase, even with the other elements removed, which shows that it is an obligatory element of the phrase, and we cannot have a phrase without its head word. If we had removed the head word instead of the other elements, we would be left with any of the following structures: dessert for the party, dessert for the party. None of the structures above fits the description of an infinitive phrase, since they lack an infinitive, particle to and base form verb. This shows that every other element of a phrase besides the head word, is optional and it is not mandatory that we include them in the phrase. The only reason we add other elements is for the purpose of clarity and to establish a context, or add more meaning to the head word. Elements of an infinitive phrase. We have already established that the most crucial element of an infinitive phrase is the head word, which consists of the particle, to, and a verb in its base form. Now we will look at the optional constituting elements of an infinitive phrase. Object. In regular sentences, we recognize the object as the entity that receives the action of the subject, through the verb. In infinitive phrase, the object is a noun or nominal element, any structure that acts as a noun, that follows the base form verb in an infinitive phrase. Take for instance, to push a heavy door. The object in the infinitive phrase above is the noun phrase, a heavy door. We know this because it appears directly after the base form verb, push, and it is the recipient of the action of the verb. Complement. Complements are groups of words that serve the purpose of describing certain words or groups of words. In this case, complements are the elements in an infinitive phrase that describe the head word. Take for instance, to do what you must. The complement in the infinitive phrase above is the relative clause, what you must. We know this because it describes the head word, to do, by telling us that which has to be done, what you must. Hence it answers the question, what? Or what type? Qualifiers. Last among the elements but certainly not the least, qualifiers are groups of words that serve the purpose of giving positional information about the head word of an infinitive phrase. Take for instance, to beat about the bush. The qualifier element in the infinitive phrase above is the prepositional phrase, about the bush. We know this because it gives positional information about the head word, telling us where the action takes place. We can also have adverbial clauses functioning as the qualifier element of an infinitive phrase. Take for instance, to go where you were not called. Where you were not called is an adverbial clause and it gives us information about where the action of go takes place. Functions of infinitive phrase. Like other phrases in English, infinitive phrases have functions they perform in sentences. They include, infinitive phrase as nouns, infinitive phrase as adjectives, infinitive phrase as adverbs, infinitive phrase as nouns. Infinitives are said to function as nouns when they play the same roles that are designated to nouns in sentences. They function as nouns when they serve as subject, object, as well as complement in sentences. Examples of infinitive phrase as subject. To forgive others' sin is a divine act. To be part of people's joy is a blessing. To take love for granted is a shameful act. All the sentences in the examples above contain infinitive phrases functioning as subjects. We know this because only infinitive phrases occupy their subject positions. Examples of infinitive phrase as object. She wants to learn Spanish. He decided to quit his job. They planned to travel next summer. All the sentences in the example above contain infinitive phrases functioning as their objects. We know this because they appear at the object position receiving the action of the subjects through their respective verbs, wants, decided, and planned. Examples of infinitive phrase as complement. His goal is to become a doctor. The best option was to leave early. Her dream is to visit Paris. All the sentences in the examples above contain infinitive phrases functioning as complements. We know this because they appear after the linking verbs in the sentence, is, and was, and they describe the subjects, his goal, the best, and her dream. Hence they are subject complements. Infinitive phrase as adjectives. Infinitive phrases function as adjectives when they serve the same purpose as regular adjectives, which is describing nouns and pronouns in sentences. Examples of infinitive phrase as adjectives. This is the best way to work on your attitude. The worst time to arrive at a party is when it's over. The first to arrive at the crime scene was Mr. Rogers. The infinitive phrases in the sentences above serve as adjectives because they describe nouns. Take the first example for instance. The noun way was described by the infinitive phrase, to work on your attitude. It gives the noun more meaning, which makes the context of its use much clearer to the addressed. Infinitive phrase as adverb. Adverbs serve the purpose of modifying verbs, adjectives, and other adverbs in sentences. Infinitive phrases can function as adverbs in sentences, although with the limitation of only adverb of reason. That is, they can only serve as adverb of reason, not adverb of place, manner or the rest. Examples of infinitives as adverbs. They came to see if the news was true. They laughed to make us feel safe. The plan was created to stop vandals from ransacking the place. The infinitive phrases in their sentences above all serve the adverbial function of indicating reason. Hence, they all answer the question, why? Take for instance, in the last example, the phrase, to stop vandals from ransacking the place, answers the question, why was the plan created? It makes more sense now, right? As it should be. Omitting the particle to in infinitive phrase. There are certain occasions when it is mandatory to drop the particle to in forming an infinitive phrase. One of such instances is when the phrase is preceded by a modal auxiliary verb. For instance, we can go to the park together. They should make the food the best. Mark might be available for the hangout. You would notice that in each of the examples above, the modal auxiliary verbs are directly followed by verbs in their base forms, while the particle to remains absent. The reason for this is that modal auxiliary verbs negate the inflectional properties of verbs they co-occur with, hence repeating the particle when the verb is already in base form would be redundant. Splitting infinitive phrase. It is not uncommon to find instances of infinitive phrases being split by placing an adverb between the particle to and the base form verb. For instance, to really understand the job. While some scholars argue in favor of its usage in writing as a modernist development, others claim it is not acceptable for use in standard or formal occasions. While both sides present valid arguments in favor of their stands, this should be a guiding rule for you whenever you are faced with deciding between splitting or using an infinitive phrase. If the structure is acceptable in infinitive phrase form, use the infinitive phrase. But if the structure will affect meaning or appear grammatical or unacceptable in infinitive phrase form, split it. For instance, to adequately understand. Split form don't use, to understand adequately. Infinitive form use, to not agree with their ideas. Split form use, to agree not with their ideas. Infinitive form don't use. Of course your usage of either forms depends on the context. You can use split infinitives in informal or casual situations, but when it comes to more formal situations, use infinitive form unless the structure appears unacceptable as in the last example above. So infinitive phrase is a phrase that is made up of the particle to and a verb in its base form, together with other elements acting as object, complement, or qualifier. Infinitive phrases can function as nouns, adjectives, or adverbs depending on their positions in sentences. Understanding infinitive phrases will better inform you on how to use them effectively not only in writing but also in speaking. See you soon.